We continue our study of the seven churches in the book of Revelation, and we're on church number 4, the church at Thyatira, also known as the corrupt church. Something pretty interesting about this city, this church. It lied in a valley that was surrounded by hills and mountains that served as a natural fortress or a protection against invading enemies. But here comes the message of Jesus Christ, and it's a reminder to us all, no matter where you go, no matter how many people you fool, no matter how great effort you go to hide your sin, Jesus knows all about you. He knows your heart, your mind. He knows where you're at before you even get there. Our God fills the heavens and the earth. God is not a God afar off, Jeremiah says. He is a God at hand. And the church at Thyatira is warned by the angel in verse 18 of chapter 2. He says, "To the angel of the church in Thyatira write, these things says the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire, and his feet are like fine brass." He says, I know your works, your love, your service, your faith, and your patience. As for your works, the last are more or better than the first. He says, nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you have allowed that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and to eat things sacrificed to idols. Did you see the description? Did you catch that? In verse 18, Jesus' eyes are like a flame of fire and his feet are like fine brass. It's worth taking time to understand this description. It's the same thing in the Old Testament that Daniel saw in chapter 10, verse 6. The Son of God, even having a pre-New Testament appearance, his eyes were like fire and his feet were like fine brass. The flaming eyes of fire means there's no escaping the judgment of God. He knows everything about us. He knows the deepest part of your heart. His feet being compared to that of fine brass or bronzed or burnished brass means he is trampling out the sin. Revelation chapter 19 tells us that his feet are going to tread the winepress of sin and injustice in this world. When Jesus returns, he's stamping out sin. He's stamping out Satan. Satan's fate is already sealed, but Jesus will execute his final sentence. So this description means that his eyes penetrate our hearts, our exterior, our outward appearance. Listen, there's 3 people sitting or standing where you are right now. Did you know that? There's 3 people. There's the person you think you are. There's the person that other people think you are, but there's the person that God knows that you are. And this is what Jesus is warning the church at Thyatira. He says, I know all about you. And what's really scary is he says, I know your works, your love, your service, your faith. Thyatira was a maturing church. It was a loving church. It had solid doctrine. And unlike the Ephesus church, which was the loveless church, it had solid doctrine, but it had no love. And you can be a church with solid doctrine, but if you don't love one another, you're destructive. But if you have love and not solid doctrine, you're equally a destructive and deadly church. So Jesus tells the church at Thyatira, listen, you love one another. You have great service. You're maturing. But something happens. Something happens to this church, because he says in verse 20, I have a few things against you. You allow, and this word allow has a threefold meaning. Number 1, it means to neglect. Secondly, it means to abandon. And third, it means to imitate. Now break this down for you tonight and for me personally. When you start neglecting prayer and Bible study and worship, when you start neglecting fellowship and service and loving one another, you will abandon the things of God, and then you will start to imitate those things that you worship. We're going to talk a lot about Jezebel and the prophetess and her influence in the church at Thyatira, but it's critically important to know that the church itself had showed some great evidence of spiritual fruit and growth, but then they stopped and they allowed the world to come into the church. And I've heard this all my pastoral life. I've heard of fellow pastors who thought they could counsel a woman alone and think they could get away with it and not fall into an affair. And it happened, even though we are warned from day one in Bible college, don't counsel a woman alone. They would do that because they thought they could stand strong against temptation. I've heard of Christians who will look at pornography And they will think, oh, it's just a quick look. And then it soon become a destructive habit and an addiction and a lifestyle. I've known people who thought that they could just question a part of God's word and it not be a big deal. And it becomes a destructive, deadly habit in their life. That's what's happening to the church at Thyatira. They started to sow these habits and they reaped a lifestyle of destruction. They neglected, they abandoned their duties to God. And all of a sudden they looked up and they were full of sexual immorality and worldly compromise. You don't think just a little sin will kill you? Oh, it will. Put a little arsenic in your water and find out how destructive it is. Don't allow the world to take control of your life. Be on guard. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about the earth like a roaring lion. Be on your guard. God bless you.